Hello everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk about ADA and what our risk model is making of its recent price action, as well as talking about the Cardano ecosystem and how that might impact ADA's price moving forward. If you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter, where we put out regular updates about our risk indicators and more. So what I'm showing you here is our risk model for ADA, the upside downside potential indicator for ADA USD. And what I'm showing you here is the price history of ADA with price in a logarithmic form. Each dot here is a day, and each day is color coded based on the output of our risk indicator. So a score of 5 is high risk. That's when the upside potential is quite low, downside potential quite high. -5 is low risk. That's when the upside potential is high, downside potential is low. And what you can see is that the UDPI does a good job of identifying these high and low risk points throughout ADA's history. And so if we look at where we are right now, we can see that coming out of the summer, we really pumped up to around $3. UDPI got into the red zone, started saying that ADA was getting overheated, and then indeed we ended up having to correct off of that higher risk zone down here into what has now become the green zone. We've come all the way down to these lower levels of risk. And I think it's interesting to note that ADA is back into a similar range that it was in during the summer of 2021, but you'll notice that the risk is actually lower this time. So at the exact same price, the UDPI is estimating that ADA has more upside relative to downside potential now than it did at those prices in the summer. In the summer it was kind of in this zone, suggesting a little bit more of an even risk-reward ratio. Now it has more of a bullish bias on ADA. It thinks there's more upside than downside potential that's realistic. Though that does not mean that ADA can't fall lower. It just means the model thinks that there's more potential for the upside than there is for the downside that's realistic. And I think we can see this a little bit more clearly if we look at the raw output. Now I should note what I'm showing you here is the long-term version of the UDPI. We actually have 3 different time frames we look at: long-term, medium, short-term. The long-term cares about moves that develop over months to years. So these broad, sweeping moves that play out over months or potentially longer, going all the way from these super low risk points, sweeping up in these kind of market cycles of these higher risk points in the asset's history. So that's what this one cares about. And so this is just the raw output. So, -5 low risk, 5 high risk with the UDPI on the y-axis. And here's what we can see is going on in the recent history. So coming out of the pump out of the summer, got up to around a level of 3, and then I've been correcting off of that since. And now we're starting to find a bottom here potentially at around -2-ish, that kind of general region. So it'll be interesting to see how this continues. Oftentimes when the UDPI forms a bottom like this, it can suggest that the trend is shifting and that we might see, if risk goes up, then price oftentimes is going up as well. But we'll just have to wait and see. It doesn't mean that we can't keep correcting further, but it is interesting to see this bottom of the UDPI develop here, kind of this leveling out. But again, what this is telling us is that in the long term, over the coming months, the UDPI expects ADA to have more upside it can realize than downside from these levels. Although certainly it's not impossible for downside to occur. But it'll be interesting to watch in what happens with this kind of bottoming out point, because it very well could turn into something like we've seen here in the past that might precede a move back to the upside. We'll just have to wait and see. I mean, really, with ADA and frankly any of the crypto assets, they kind of don't have their fate in their own hands right now to some degree. Bitcoin's not doing well, and then the broader macro environment is very uncertain. And so really it would be surprising to me if ADA can just decouple itself and go crazy while the rest of the market is kind of bearish. So I would expect that for this upside to be realized, we would need to see a shift in the broader markets where things would have to get a bit more bullish before that could happen. But then certainly, if that does happen, I see no reason why ADA couldn't go ahead and start realizing the upside. But again, we're just going to have to wait and see what happens with that broader environment. And of course, none of this is financial advice. You should make your own decisions. This is just what I'm seeing in my interpretation of this data. So to show another perspective, I want to show the different time frames next to each other. So I was just showing you the long term, but we also look at the medium term UDPI, which captures moves that play out for over weeks to months. So a little bit of a shorter time horizon. So this medium term UDPI is still caring about these macro moves, these kind of macro cycles, but it's really more reflective or reflexive to shorter term volatility. So for example, coming out of the summer, you'll note that the medium term UDPI actually got up to a higher point, and basically it was just saying that in its mind, over the coming weeks, you know, the remaining upside was quite limited, and of course that's exactly what we saw. You know, we corrected quite heavily, very little kind of more up. We didn't go up beyond this point after that, so that's what this is really reflecting here. And then the same thing with the short-term UDPI as well. This cares about moves that play out over days to weeks, and so again, you can see that this cares a lot more about that kind of intra-week volatility, or inter-week volatility. And we see that coming out of the summer, again, it really spiked up to these high levels, suggesting that in the short term, you couldn't really expect any more upside out of ADA, and indeed that's exactly what we ended up seeing. You know, the upside had gotten exhausted. So that's just something to note there. And so now we can see that for these, they're a little bit more uncertain than where the long term is. So whereas the long term is at around a -2, the short term is a little bit above -1, and the medium term is also a bit above -1. So essentially, in the UDPI's mind, in the medium and short term, it could kind of go either way, a slight bullish bias, but it really could go either way. But then in the longer term, it expects more upside than downside a little bit more clearly. So that's how I'm interpreting this data here. So I think then to think more about what might catalyze moves one way or the other, I want to talk a bit more about the Cardano ecosystem that's now getting its gears rolling. You know, decentralized DApps are launching on Cardano. You know, the Sunday swap, the first DEX, launched recently. So things are happening, things are emerging. I want to talk about that and how it might feed into what happens with the price of ADA moving forward. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, you may have seen this report before, but if you haven't, a firm, Electric Capital, had put out this pretty great report. I'll link to this in the description if you want to look at the full report, check out what they have to say. But they released this full report looking at developer activity on different blockchains and different crypto layer 1 blockchains. And essentially what they were looking at a lot of different things, but one of the things they looked at was growth. So essentially the idea from their perspective is they wanted to know which blockchains are attracting the most developers, with the idea that blockchains that are attracting a lot of development right now might be at an advantage because maybe they'll get more decentralized applications launched on their platforms. That might draw in new users, that draws in new demand for those tokens, and that might be a bullish tailwind for those blockchains. And so what we can see, what I want to highlight is here's Cardano here, and what we're looking at on this graph is the number of developers who are present for each of the blockchains in 2020, so end of 2020, and how that changed over the year going into the end of 2021. So essentially what we're looking at here is a change, a relative change. And so what these lines here, these dotted lines mean is how big was the growth on different blockchains, how extreme, how many multiples. So anything above this dotted line here is a 2x increase in developers, so they double the number of developers. Anything above this is a 3x increase, and up here is a 4x increase. And so what we can see is Cardano is not doing badly by any means. So they're right around the 2x space for developers. So that basically means that over that year, Cardano doubled the number of developers working on it, which is great to see, and it beat out Binance Smart Chain, interestingly enough, even though Binance Smart Chain is a larger market cap asset. So that's interesting. And then of course, it beat out also Bitcoin and actually also Cosmos in the sense of growth, even though Cosmos actually has more overall developers at this time. But of course, we can also note that Cardano was not growing as quickly as some of these other blockchains. So Near, Polygon, Solana have been doing better in terms of growth, and Solana is kind of blowing everyone out of the water right now to some degree. Near has actually been doing extremely well for being kind of a newer player into the space, or one that kind of has snuck up on a lot of people. But I think what we're seeing here is that Cardano's not out of it from this perspective by any means. You know, Cardano has a good number of developers working on it. It did grow a good amount in the last year. I think that's great, especially given that Cardano didn't even have smart contracts deployed before this year, whereas a lot of these other chains did. So I think that's something that's going to be useful to watch, interesting to watch. I'll be curious to see if this firm does another one of these reports next year what happens if Cardano is able to attract more developers. But certainly it's something that you'd want to see, right? So for Cardano to really realize its potential, in my opinion, it needs to continue attracting developers. We need to see people actually using the chain, because really up until this point, Cardano has been thriving based on its potential. People look at it, they see the potential of the ecosystem, the potential of Cardano, and that's what's been drawing the attention. But now we're at the point where the rubber needs to meet the road. Cardano needs to actually start realizing that potential that it has. And so if it can do that, I see no problems then. I think that's going to be great. I have no reason but to expect it to be able to continue growing. It's only if it were to falter on that aspect that I get concerned. So I'm personally going to be watching this metric closely. That is Cardano able to continue to attract developers or not? And of course, one of the things that we have to think about with Cardano is that it is unique in the sense that it uses a different programming language than a lot of blockchains. It uses Haskell, which has its pros and cons. The cons being that it's not as popular, but the pros being that there's some security advantages potentially to using that. So we'll just have to see if they can convert more people. And certainly if they can, and the ecosystem keeps growing, then it could just be a snowball effect. We'll have to wait and see. But again, that's something I'd like to see keep on growing. If it stalls, that's something I'd be concerned about moving forward. But of course, we also know that adoption or development on Cardano has been quite high so far, and we'd like to see this go on as well. So here I'm just showing you a snapshot from Cardano Cube. You can go check out that website to see the full list of different apps that are being launched, or kind of the whole scope of the ecosystem. This is just showing the first little bit here. As you can see, there's a lot of development going on Cardano. That's great. Again, I'd like to see that continue and to increase, and for people to come in and start using these products, because again, that brings in demand, and if demand enters the space, if people need ADA to use all these different applications, that will increase the price of ADA. That's going to make it appreciate over time, something that is going to be important for anyone who is holding it as an investment and wants to see it appreciate over time. Let's talk also about DeFi adoption. So again, Cardano is rolling out DeFi projects now. And so it's actually now sitting at 39 overall. This is according to DeFi Llama. That's where I pulled these statistics. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out as well. Again, DeFi on Cardano is quite young, so this is not, in my opinion, very diagnostic yet of where things are going. I think over the coming months is how we're really going to want to watch and see, can Cardano start to capture some of the DeFi interest, maybe pull away some of the money from other blockchains, and then can it rise through the ranks? That's something I'm going to be watching. And especially as more DeFi protocols launch, it'll be interesting to watch to see if adoption also rises with the number of protocols. You can see that the ballpark it's currently in is it's near blockchains like Tezos and Algorand, which have DeFi on them already. Actually launched, some of these have had it for quite a bit longer, so that's already encouraging to see Cardano at this level. But again, I'd like to see this grow a lot. If this stagnates, if this doesn't really do much, that would be concerning, because this is just one hallmark of adoption. DeFi has tended to go along with valuation. Blockchains like Avalanche or Phantom have really shot up because, in no small part, because, in my opinion, of their DeFi adoption. So I'd like to see Cardano do that as well. Now, again, DeFi is just one use case of Cardano. I'm not saying this is the main driver, the primary driver, but certainly one of them. I'd like to see this go up in the future, something I'm going to be keeping my eyes on. And then what also I think is just notable, and what I wanted to show here, was that kind of, even though Cardano's rollout of its ecosystem is nascent, it's very early days for the Cardano ecosystem, it's still currently sitting at number 6 in total market cap. So I pulled this off of CoinMarketCap here. We can see that Cardano's still sitting way up there. It's the third largest layer 1 blockchain behind Ethereum and BNB. And so that's great. That's good. And one of the reasons that's good is it suggests that there's a lot of community that already exists in Cardano. I think we know that. The Cardano community is huge. And so the idea is that if Cardano can start to realize some of its potential, if we can start putting the rubber on the road and demonstrating its value and really roll out an ecosystem, that just means there's probably just a ton of people who are out there who are ready to step in and start using it, because a lot of people hold Cardano. It's a big market cap asset. A lot of people hold it. And so if they then want to go and start using the ecosystem, that could bring in additional demand. But again, I think we're at a point with Cardano now where, as I mentioned before, up till this point, people have been really investing for the potential. I think we're going to see a shift now where people are going to be investing based on what they're seeing. Is Cardano able to live up to that potential, live up to that promise? If you're a Cardano bull, then you probably have no doubt in your mind that it will. But what I'm going to be looking at personally is that going to happen, right? I see no reason why it couldn't happen. But again, just because something has potential doesn't mean that it's guaranteed. So I personally will be keeping a close eye on how the ecosystem around Cardano develops. And if it develops well and it fully fleshes out, then in my opinion, it's clear skies ahead. Obviously it's going to be at the whims of the broader crypto markets, all the things like that. But from a fundamental perspective, there'd be nothing especially worrying in my eyes. Where I would start getting concerned is if things just don't go according to plan. If adoption just doesn't happen, if there are other issues that arise that are unforeseen at this point, that can then change the dynamics, change the thesis a little bit. But again, where I stand right now, I'm not saying that will happen or that Cardano is not going to be able to realize that potential. You're not getting any FUD here. I'm really just saying that I'm going to wait and see. And I think Cardano needs to prove now that it has that potential that so many people have seen in it. So again, that's just my perspective, not financial advice. You should make your own decisions. But that's the way that I'm thinking about. One of the things I'm thinking about with Cardano right now is how does that ecosystem play out? Because I think that'll be a big part in where ADA goes from here. So to wrap up, I just want to show the different time frames of the UDPI again, just to wrap us up. So the exact levels as I record this are the long term is negative 1.86. So again, a bullish bias, more expected upside versus downside potential in the longer term, or at least more potential for the upside than the downside in the longer term, but not to preclude the possibility of downside that definitely exists. The medium term and the short term again are a little bit more undecided. So in the coming weeks or days to weeks, the model is a little bit more undecided. I think there's a decent amount of realistic downside, but slightly biased towards thinking there's a little bit more realistic upside in those different time frames. So we'll just have to watch it and see what happens, but certainly nothing especially scary right now. We're not at these super high risk zones that have often preceded corrections. This basically suggests that in this move down, we've started to realize a lot of the realistic downside potential. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And so it would not be surprising to see a reversal off of these levels, but it's no guarantee, of course, also. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter. And remember, with the UDPI, we're all going to make it.